Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter for Buha's Block, and welcome to another post-game reaction. Just got in right before midnight after an 8 p.m. local time tip. I can only imagine for those on the East Coast. This is the real late night game. Game did not start until 8:15 p.m. Pacific time. Apologies for going a little bit later than I anticipated and for the start of this, but we got it ready. Had to get my SeatGeek ad ready to go. But shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. The Lakers beat the LA Clippers 135-118 for their fifth straight win. They improved to 13-4. They are back to number 2 in the West, technically tied with the Denver Nuggets, but they have the tiebreaker due to being in the lead in the Pacific Division right now. And they also clinched West Group B in the NBA Cup, guaranteeing a spot in the quarterfinals. So they will advance out of group play into the elimination round and potentially have a rematch with the Oklahoma City Thunder, or maybe an early look at the Denver Nuggets. And then the fourth team, like those right now are the three teams favored to win each of the three groups in the West. And then we're not quite sure yet who the wild card is going to be. It's going to depend on record and point differential and several different factors that will play out here over the course of the rest of the week. But the Lakers are guaranteed a spot in the quarterfinals, which means they will either be hosting another game or going on the road for another game. And based on their point differential, that they are looking like they're in a pretty good spot to potentially host a game. But we'll see how things play out over the rest of the week. But we have a lot to touch on tonight's show. Before we get into it, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. It's officially midnight. It's officially Wednesday morning. So again, shout out to the late night gang. Let's get into it. So overarching thought for me from tonight's game is the Big Three blueprint. And what I mean by that is I thought we saw a notable step in the right direction from the Big Three of Luka, LeBron, and Austin. And not just in the numbers, because the numbers are what they are. The Lakers had some regression to the mean with their three-point shooting. Luka and Austin were just talking about coming off the Utah game that neither one of them could hit a three-pointer, and both had lost their shots respectively, and they entered this game shooting just over 31% each on threes. Luka goes 7 for 12, Austin goes 2 for 4, LeBron goes 2 for 5. He had entered the game just 2 for 7 on threes this season. So none of the Big Three had been shooting the ball well, and they all had a more normal shooting performance for them respectively. So they were due for some regression to the mean. But like putting that aside, I just thought the way that the Lakers attacked this game and the pace of it in terms of each guy getting their own shift or getting their segment of the game to dominate and to exert their will. So it has to start with Luka. 43 points, 9 rebounds, and 13 assists. He had 24 points in the first quarter, which was a season high for him, and just ripped the heart out of the Clippers. It was wild that, like, typically when Luka has that type of quarter, the Lakers are at least leading or sometimes even up by like double figures. The Lakers were actually down by 1 because the defense was so bad in that first quarter. They also were making some bets against the Clippers' shaky shooters or non-shooters, and they lost most of them early, and then that started to go in the Lakers' favor in the second half to a degree, more so in the fourth quarter. But Luka just, I mean, Luka has a long-standing blood feud with the Clippers, where it's the team he averages the most points per game against for his career. They beat him twice in the playoffs, his first 2 playoff series. So there's been bad blood since the beginning of the decade. But You do not want bad blood with Luka Doncic because he he just goes Super Saiyan and just eviscerates you. And I mean, it was very reminiscent of, remember the Lakers had a couple of games against the Clippers last year with Luka, and he had a similar monster first quarter, similar, high 30s, low 40s type performance. And he's, that one was, he's telling the Clippers to play up more on the pick and roll. He had similar moments drawing with their bench in the first quarter and throughout the game, which also culminated in that Chris Dunn altercation. But Luka just loves playing against the Clippers, and if you're a Clippers fan, it's tough when you see number 77 on the opposing side because I saw some tweets of Clippers fans rightfully crashing out because of just Luka. He's the best player in the world, maybe the best player of all time when he faces the Clippers, but. 14 to 28 shooting for Luka, 7 to 12, but he sets the tone early, has 24 in the first quarter, 32 at halftime, and only scores 11 points in the second half. But he didn't need to because, the Lakers have Austin Reeves and LeBron James. And Austin Reeves, a cool 31 points on 11 of 16 shooting, 2 for 4 on threes, 7 to 7 at the free throw line. And Austin had, if my quick math is correct, he had 18 in the fourth quarter. So he entered with a relatively quiet performance through the first 3 quarters, but was actually leading the group in rebounding with 8. So he was making an impact in that regard, but only 13 points for Austin through the first 3 quarters. Then he just explodes for 12 points in the first few minutes of the fourth, helps the Lakers. Lakers are really weird. I'm not even going to get into the refereeing. As you guys know, I like to stay out of that stuff, but an oddly officiated game where both teams had multiple plays they wanted to challenge. There's a couple of challenges that the Clippers had that won against the Lakers, and just an oddly officiated game. I will leave it at that. But so some weird stuff happened at the end of the third, but the Lakers end up going into the fourth with a little bit of a lead. And then Austin, 5 for 7 in the quarter, and then all 7 of his free throws were in the fourth as well. So he iced the game, and that's been a trend for him this season. Of course, most notably with the Minnesota game. But Austin has been leading this group in scoring in the fourth quarter and has had several notable fourth quarter performances this season, and just continued that, and that was part of the difference. I will touch on the difference ultimately, more later. And then LeBron, 25 points, 9 to 15 shooting, 5 for 6 at the free throw line, which 6 free throws for LeBron is 15, 17 for Austin or Luka. That's a lot of free throws for LeBron based on his whistle sometimes. But 25 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. And I thought it started to, the Lakers just got into a really nice flow, particularly with the Austin Luka 2-man game in those shifts, beginning of second quarter and beginning of fourth quarter. And those two just have a chemistry and a synergy and an element of continuity going back now multiple seasons, Austin's entire career, where those two have just had this telepathy out there and this connection where, that the highlight of the game, there's several, but to me was that backdoor cut from Austin where LeBron hits the pass, finds it right in the pocket, splits 2 defenders, and Austin in one motion grabs that and goes up with it. Really tough finish from him. Incredible pass from LeBron. And that, to me, we've talked about what the second unit groupings could look like. And I thought we started to finally see some, connection with those two again, kind of rekindling that connection, but then also just with they really won those second unit minutes. And I thought those were a couple of big stretches. The first few minutes of the second, first few minutes of the fourth, those two stretches might've been the difference in the game. But LeBron getting downhill, still working back in terms of his conditioning, though I thought it was better tonight. Still working back in terms of his speed and his burst, and that's just something we don't yet know if he's going to ever fully get back or what that's going to look like. He just has not been as quick as he was last season, but it's been 3 games, so I want to obviously give him grace. But especially in that third quarter, that was more so LeBron's segment. And that was a stretch where the game started to get, like, first the Lakers extend it to 10 and LeBron hits that jumper to give them a 10-point lead. Then the Clippers roar back and they go on a big run. They get it to within 1, then they eventually take back the lead, and then they're trading baskets the rest of the quarter. But LeBron had several big plays and several big drives, and nearly had that alley-oop. Alley-oops continue to be not only an issue for LeBron, but just an issue for the Lakers in general in terms of not connecting on lobs. But I just think, the next level for these three together, like, to me, this was by far the best they've looked together. It's been 3 games, of course, but this was more of a real opponent, more of a real defense, not a bottom 4 defense, and not one of the 4 or 5 worst teams in the league, though the Clippers aren't too far away from that. But I thought this was like a major step in the right direction in terms of how those 3 look together. I think the next step in the evolution and the process with them is going to be unlocking more 3-man actions, more Luka LeBron, and I think that they've tried to run some 3-man stack or 3-man horns or whatever, and it still has not quite looked where it needs to be. It's not as sharp as it should be, but that's okay because it's been 3 games and LeBron is still working himself back. He talked about this Utah stretch being essentially a training camp for him. So through that lens, this would be like the beginning of the season for LeBron, like, opening night or second game or whatever. So we need to give him some time. We need to give this group some time to gel and continue to unlock different wrinkles within the offense. But when Luka is starting games like this, and we know this is how this is the ideal version of Luka, he scores somewhere between 12 and 18 points and maybe 20 if it's the right night. And then just continues to build off of that. And then the defense has to, like you saw, they were trying to switch. They were trying to throw different looks at him. Eventually got to the point where they just had to sell out, especially with that step back 3 falling. And when they sell out, you see now with LeBron and Austin in the 4-on-3, it's just such a high level of playmaking for the Lakers. And then also Jackson. I thought Jackson, his numbers didn't really pop in terms of 8 points, 4 rebounds. Obviously, he also had a highlight with pushing Chris Dunn and drawing a technical foul there and standing up for Luka. Luka said he's going to cover his fine. But Jackson's short roll playmaking, 3 assists, and I think several other assist opportunities out of that. Like, that's what you want to see. And again, don't want to make too much of single game plus minus, but the Lakers were plus 21 in Jackson's 30 minutes, which was a team high mark. And they looked just really difficult to defend when Jackson was out there putting pressure on the rim and also making plays out of the short roll. So I just think like this is a really important step for LA, a building block. This is like, the first game, LeBron's first game back, he was not quite himself offensively. I still don't think he's quite himself, but he's working his way back there. Second game was a bit of a nightmare offensively. LA had some really good stretches and flashes in that game, but they tricked it away, or nearly tricked it away in the fourth quarter, and not quite the same level of offense we saw in that first game or tonight. Tonight was the culmination of what I think they've been trying to build toward, and there's still so much meat left on the bone that they can pick at and improve with. So I think for where they're at right now, you take the win. It was a commanding win, won by 17, going to improve the point differential, improve the net rating. But I think in terms of like each guy having their moment and it just feeling very natural, it wasn't like we need to get LeBron going, so we're going to go to him right here. We need to get Austin going. He's had a quiet first 3 quarters. We need to like it felt very natural, and just they were out there playing basketball and they were reacting to what the defense was giving them, and who had certain mismatches, and they were spam. I mean, they targeted Chris Paul basically off the floor, where it was, where's Chris Paul? Let's bring him into the action. They were trying to get LeBron against him in the post, but they were also trying to attack him off of the dribble. And I thought it was just a masterful performance from the big 3. And it's kind of nuts to think that they combined for 99 points on 34 of 59 shooting. And I still think the ceiling's even higher. I still think, I mean, I would not be surprised if we see a game in the future where all 3 have 30 plus, or all 3 even have like 35 plus. I think that's in play with this trio. It's a special trio. You even had Skip Bayless tweeting that this is the best backcourt of all time, the best backcourt trio. But Skip Bayless is tweeting something positive about LeBron. You know something's going right or wrong, I guess. But that was the biggest thing for me tonight. Like, we'll touch on the defense in a second. Certainly in the second half, some really good defensive moments, but even in that second quarter, positive. A lot of positives from the role players. But those three, like, that's the story for me coming off of this, is what that looked like and what it can continue to be and continue to grow into. I think is really, really encouraging for where the Lakers are at. Notable performers, already touched on Luka, already touched on Austin, already touched on LeBron. So I mentioned Jackson, 8 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal and a block. Played 30 minutes with Deandre Ayton out. So we going back to last season, remember, there was a lot of games Jackson played 15, 16, 18, maybe 20 minutes, and getting the 30-minute shifts tonight, I thought was a stamp of approval from JJ and a sign of Jackson's growth and them trusting him defensively out there against this Clippers team that does have a lot of individual firepower, and that trio of Harden, Kawhi, and Zubats is a really good offensive trio. So Jackson, I thought, held his own for the most part, had a really nice block, a really nice goaltend that was, looked like I thought it looked like a block at first, but then on the replay it was a goaltend. But just some really nice minutes from Jackson. Rui, 13 points, 3 rebounds, 6 to 9 shooting, continues to be a really valuable safety valve, in terms of if a play breaks down and you swing the ball to Rui, you have confidence he's going to hit the open 3. He's going to attack the closeout, hit the one dribble, pull up midi. He continues to be a clear positive on the offensive end. I think some of the defensive stuff I will get into in a second. Marcus Smart, I thought, like, he was the guy who I believe both challenges ended up being fouls on Marcus Smart, and it was directly Harden Smart interactions or like collisions. They both go against Smart. He does end up with 3 fouls in his 20 minutes, but he hit a big 3. They were ignoring him in the corner. That's what he has to do. Hit his only 3 of the night. Hits that 3, but also has a couple of nice finishes in the paint. One is like an offense rebound gets tipped to him. He's wide open, lays it up. Then he also had that nice back cut for the layup. So Marcus came in, did his job offensively, but then especially did his job defensively. I thought he was taking on the Harden assignment, also had several possessions against Kawhi, and he was pressuring the ball. He was being disruptive. He was making them uncomfortable. It was a situation where they were clearly trying to get Marcus switched off of whoever was like the primary player out there that he was guarding. So I thought this was one of Marcus's better defensive performances, and like another playoff-like atmosphere, playoff-like situation where he excelled and looked like he clearly belongs out there. Maxi Kleba, I thought like what was solid in his minutes and continues to have a lot of utility defensively with his versatility of switching onto smaller players, and just a really smart positional defender with his hips, his angles, the way he contests, the way he is consistently boxing out. I think he just does a lot of little things that don't show up in the box score. We saw some of the limitations offensively, especially with their switching. They were okay with switching a guard or perimeter guy onto Maxi and just living with it. So he had that one uncontested like short roll pop or short roll into the free throw line area, gets the pass from Luka, hits an uncontested jumper, but then a couple of misses a open 3, and then also has it that I believe it was off an offensive rebound where Zubac just contests him, and there's nothing he could really do about that. So we did see some of his like offensive limitations, I guess, to a degree, but for a 13-minute a night, 14-minute a night backup 5, like you could do much worse. And I think they did lose his minutes, and he was the only rotation guy who had a negative plus minus, but I don't want to read too much into that. I think Maxi continues to look like solid, and might be more of a matchup based guy, especially once DeAndre Ayton's back. But for now, I think he belongs in the rotation, and he's looked overall, I think, better than expected. Jake LaRavia, 17 minutes, 4 points, 1 rebound. the numbers aren't going to jump out at you, but I thought he had one of the most impactful stretches of the game to start that second quarter, where he locked down Kawhi. Like, you know, Kawhi hit one contested jumper over him, but the thing with Kawhi now is Kawhi doesn't have the same level of burst and athleticism that he used to have, and he relies a lot more on footwork and power and strength and using his shoulders and creating that separation and then rising up. And he did that well tonight. He had, he only made 6 shots, which feels, I feel like he made at least like 10, but you know, the box score is the box score. It felt like 10 shots for Kawhi, but several of those were really nice contests from Jake, and Jake just didn't allow him to create that separation. And you see the value of having a big physical perimeter defender where he would try to create that separation against Jake, and Jake just isn't budging. And Jake has really good hands, so he's getting in there, he's poking the ball loose, he's getting deflections, he's getting steals. Only one steal for the night, but definitely had at least a couple of deflections outside of that. So I thought that shift, like the Clippers were in a groove offensively. They closed the first quarter, taking back the lead. Harden hits that 3 late in the first, and it felt like the game was teetering momentum wise a little bit from the Lakers, but that shift to start the second, like Gabe was also a part of that shift. I thought he had some good defensive minutes as well, but Jake in particular, I thought was the most impactful and disruptive defender and defensive playmaker out there. And I thought he was kind of carrying the defense overall in that stretch. And that to me was like, that's not going to show up in the box score other than maybe plus minus a little bit. But like that was a really key stretch where I thought, you know, Kawhi could have torched them or could have gotten to a certain groove that Jake kind of prevented. And then Gabe, 18 minutes, 0 for 2 shooting, 0 points, but did have a bench best plus 17, or Lakers were plus 17 in his minutes. I think continues to help defensively, and you know, the Lakers are now building this culture of, you know, the Banshees 2.0. I think this Banshees group is better than last year's Banshees group, and Gabe fits into that identity. I still think the minutes, in my opinion, between Marcus, Jake, and Gabe are a little too close. I think Marcus and Jake are just overall more impactful players and players who have more versatility on the defensive end and aren't going to be as picked on, or not even picked on, but Gabe just has a size limitation that there are certain guys that you know, if he gets switched onto, like even a Kawhi, they can just rise up and shoot over him in a way that he just can't really bother them. And I don't think that's the same. Now, Marcus and Jake have some foot speed issues that Gabe doesn't have. So that's like Gabe's advantage, I guess, in comparison with them. But I still feel like most of the matchups, most of the time teams are attacking Gabe with size. It's not really speed. So if there is a switch or something, they are looking to attack him with size. And that's where I feel like that continues to be a little bit of a concern in certain matchups. Not as much tonight, but I would like to see Marcus and Jake play a little bit more than they have with this like fully healthy group. And then stat of the night, 44.8% on threes for the Lakers, which was a season high tonight. So nothing to write home about in terms of 13 of 29. So 13 is the third most threes for the Lakers this season. That their season high is 15. 29 attempts is obviously a very low number in 2025, but they hit 44.8%. As aforementioned, there was some positive regression due for LA, and or regression to the mean rather. And we saw that with Luka hitting 7 threes, Austin going 2 for 4, LeBron 2 for 5, Rui only got a couple up, hit his, Marcus hit his. So it was mainly concentrated with the big three, but the Lakers are still a low volume 3-point shooting team. But if you're going to be a low volume 3-point shooting team, you want to be a good 3-point shooting team. You don't want to be a low volume 3-point shooting team and a bad 3-point shooting team, which is what the Lakers have been up to this point in the season. They've been bottom 5 in both metrics. So they were due to shoot better, and that was the result tonight. And then the other couple stats for me that really stood out were only 11 turnovers and 12 offensive rebounds. So the Lakers controlled the possession game. They took 6 more shots than the Clippers and 2 more free throws than the Clippers. That gap was larger until the last few minutes of the game. So the Lakers are not a team that typically wins or dominates the possession battle, but I thought tonight was a really impressive possession battle performance from them. And then takeaway number 1 for me, I will roll through these and then get into the Q&A. Takeaway number 1 is going to be a bench of banshees and a change. And this is going to be overall positive, but a little bit of a nitpick too. So I think the bench has been one of the biggest differences for the Lakers over the last 3 games that LeBron has been back, where they've had some really good spurts with certain bench units, particularly defensively, and it has sometimes led to transition opportunities, fast break opportunities for LA. But like defense has turned into offense, and they've had these stretches with Marcus, with Maxey, with Jake, with Gabe. Like right now, especially with DeAndre out, you could argue those are the Lakers' 4 best rotation defenders. I think Jackson belongs in that conversation. DeAndre, of course, belongs in the conversation overall. I would put both of those guys at the back end of this conversation, but the Lakers' best defenders right now are coming off of the bench. And that seems to be the way that JJ likes to do the starting group and the bench group and the rotations, and staggering in, replacing scorers and shooters with defensive-minded bench guys. And it's working, right? The Lakers are 3-0 since LeBron came back. They're on a 5-game winning streak. And I thought tonight the bench had some really impressive stretches or bench-centric groups with like at least 2 or 3 bench guys in them, had some really nice shifts. And, I highlighted second quarter, fourth quarter, the first like few minutes of both of those quarters were really impressive. However, I come back to the starting group, and they were -4 in each of their 2 opening shifts for the 2 halves. They ended up being a +2 in 13 minutes because they went +6 in 2 of the final 3 minutes of the game. You can count that if you want. I'm not going to count that because the game was already sealed. Like, they were up by basically 20. Clippers still had their guys out there. So again, you could count that if you want. But for me, like the starting group continues to be underwhelming, and we only have 3 game sample size here. But regardless, like the quartet, because part of it's been DeAndre Ayton, part of it's been Jackson Hayes. So I wanted to kind of normalize for that. But the quartet of LeBron, Rui, Austin, and Luka entered tonight a -11 in 27 minutes. And I don't have the full lineup data yet. I will have that later tonight, going into tomorrow. But that starting group was a -4 in its 11 minutes between the beginning shift of the first quarter and the beginning shift of the third quarter. And I think based on the competition that they're playing right now, between 2 games against Utah and a game against the Clippers, if we take the Clippers at face value in terms of the type of team they've been this season, the Lakers should be winning these starting minutes. And it should not be, 1 second. Okay. Sorry, I thought I was having an AirPods issue, but the Lakers should be winning these minutes by more and more convincingly. And the guy I think that clearly has stood out with the starting group as being the guy who should probably be replaced for a defender is Rui. And I think one of the big things over these 3 games has been, like, even tonight, Rui only getting 2 3-point shots. That to me is at least a yellow flag, if not an orange flag, in terms of the way he's being used and the way he's sort of being phased out of the offense as the a distant 4th option, and sometimes even a 5th option when DeAndre Ayton is there. And I just think balancing the bench group with the starters, it changes JJ's definition of banshee, because Rui's not a banshee and he likes his bench banshees. But I just think at this point, I would go with Marcus. I thought Jake like the best version of Jake does inspire confidence, and that guy I think is a starting caliber player, but he's been pretty up and down. So I get why Marcus is the guy who makes more sense. But I think for me, like just seeing the Lakers in both halves start with Austin on, I mean, they were switching a lot, but there was times where it was like Austin or Luka on James Harden and then Rui on Kawhi. I just, if we're holding the Lakers to a championship standard, I just think if those are your primary defenders against another team starting group and two scorers at the level of James Harden and Kawhi, like I thought those guys got really good looks against the starting group in particular. And the times they actually started to struggle was when Marcus Smart came in, Gabe Vincent came in, Jake LaRavia came in. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's very clearly spelled out by just the defensive talent, the way the bench is defending. And I just, it feels like the Lakers are just starting games off in a 4-point hole, 6-point hole unnecessarily. And I just, so I'm only nitpicking because I think I continue to say the standard should be OKC and Denver and Houston and what those teams are doing and the way their starters are dominating, the way their teams are dominating. And this game, this performance is a step in that direction for sure. 17-point win. That's going to help again, the point differential in that rating. But I just don't think that the starting group makes a lot of sense together. I think that's played out in 3 games. And these are 3 teams they probably should have looked better against based on the team's record and performance and 2 of the 3 games being in LA. And that's just not how this has gone. So, I mean, they still have a relatively easy schedule here on this homestand against, New Orleans, Dallas, New Orleans, and Phoenix. So maybe the numbers get juiced up a little bit off of that. But going into that road trip, which is going to be a big road trip, Toronto's playing well, Boston's playing better, Philly's been solid all year. Like, I just think they're going to have to revisit some of this because that's really like the only blemish for me right now in the rotation, other than maybe a little bit too much Gabe. I just think that the starting group, regardless of if it's Jackson or DeAndre, obviously, DeAndre is a better player and makes a difference there. But I just think they need to make a change, and that's been apparent through 3 games. Then takeaway number 2, I mentioned at the top, Lakers have clinched West Group B, which means they are going to the quarterfinals. And depending on what happens with the point differential and who comes out, they could be hosting a game against maybe a Denver or whoever is the other wild card. Likely, OKC's probably going to be the 1 seed in the West. So I think the Lakers will probably be in the 2-3 and maybe host Denver. But with Denver now losing Christian Brown and Aaron Gordon, I think that breaks in the Lakers' favor in that matchup, especially if they're at home. So the Lakers are set up nicely here to at least go to the semifinals and have either a rematch with OKC in the quarterfinals or the semifinals. And I think it's a nice barometer test for them, right? So I don't think J-Dub is going to be back by then, if I'm not mistaken, but LeBron being back, they get that full strength crack, assuming Deandre Ayton will be back by then in a couple weeks or so. Not DeAndre, but like the matchup being in a couple weeks, assuming DeAndre is back, I would like to see the Lakers play OKC and what that looks like and what the second matchup looks like and getting it now instead of in February after the trade deadline. So Lakers are advancing and they have a shot to get their second NBA Cup in 3 years. And everyone was talking about the money tonight. Jackson talked about it at shoot around. Luka was talking about it. JJ was talking about it. So the money is on their mind, and that is clearly a great motivator for both NBA players and NBA coaches. And then third and final thing before we get into the Q&A is DeAndre Ayton injury update. So DeAndre Ayton had imaging done on his knee, and there was everything was clean and clear, except there was a little bit of swelling. So JJ said he is hopeful that DeAndre returns by the end of the week. That sounds more like Sunday than Friday, but the Lakers are going to be off here. They're not practicing on Wednesday. not yet sure if they're practicing on Thursday. Maybe they do a quick like team meeting or something, and then probably we'll have a shoot around on Friday and then play Dallas on Friday. So that is a matchup you want Deandre Ayton for, especially with Anthony Davis potentially returning. They have Gafford. Lively's seems like he's going to be out for that game. I think he's out the next 3 games. So Lively will be out, but they'll still have Gafford and AD who will test Jackson and Maxey. But we know Luka does not need any motivation for a Dallas matchup. And then you add in the NBA Cup in LA, cementing their standing in the West and the point differential and all that. Like they won the group, but it still could, they could be the 1 seed potentially if they have an emphatic win over Dallas. So that is something that I think they're going to be striving for. But before we get into the Q&A here, I'm going to take a quick break for an ad read, and I will be back in 1 minute. So thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring tonight's show. If you're looking for the best possible deal on Lakers tickets, look no further than the sponsor of today's video, SeatGeek. With over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 ticketing app. There are more than 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. The NBA, NFL, college football, and college basketball are all underway. I love using SeatGeek, whether it's for USC football tickets or trying to help a friend or family member get the best deal possible on Lakers tickets. And SeatGeek has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. So look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee. And of course, I have a code for you guys. You could use code Jovan10 for 10% off your next purchase at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets with promo code Jovan10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you could use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. All right, we are back. Let's get into the Q&A here. Appreciate you guys for the patience and rocking with me for almost 40 minutes so far. First one from Glenn. Thank you for the super chat. Thanks, Jovan. You're the best. Thank you, Glenn. You are the best. I appreciate it. Devil's Knight 666. Quite the name there. I appreciate the super chat. Do not see a question. So if you drop it in the chat, I will do my best to answer it. Johnny, thank you for the super chat. Dating back to last year when AR, Luka, and Braun played, there's been a lot of my turn, your turn ball and stagnant possessions. Tonight, it felt like every time one of them would catch the ball was a shot or immediate drive to the paint. You laid out the point I tried to make with my overarching thought very eloquently here. I think the decision-making, the processing, it was much quicker. And again, like there was still an element of my turn, your turn ball to a degree, but I think the stagnation was not there as much. And there were still some shots I did not love. I wrote in my notes, like LeBron had a step back in the first quarter, a step back 3 that he missed in the first quarter that I didn't love. Austin had a step back 3 in the first quarter I didn't love. He also had a couple of ISO jumpers that I felt were not great shots. Luka was objectively taking some bad shots, but he was making all of them, and he got into that groove where it's like when Luka's in that groove, you just say, take every shot. And that's basically what he did in the first quarter. So, but then he cooled off for sure, and progressively throughout the rest of the game, I thought took a couple heat check shots that I think could maybe be cut out from his shot diet. But for the most part, I thought all 3 guys played within the confines of the offense and the offensive system and what they're trying to do. And again, to your point, like I thought the processing was much quicker, and the advantage creation, the advantage extending, like all that stuff was sharp in a way that I think just takes time, right? And so I think we're here in late November. I think this is going to look much different in late January and much different in late March. And if I'm the rest of the league, I'm scared at that notion, because I think it is going to get to a point where I just don't know how you stop this team and their offense. Defensively, I think you could test them depending on who you are, but you're going to have to score at a very high and efficient level to keep up with LA's offense. I want to be GM's podcast. Thank you for the super chat. Let me know. Nets get Rui, Gabe, Kleba, Temple, and LA's first. Raptors get Connect, Tyrese Martin, 1 to 2 Nets seconds, duck under the luxury tax. LA gets Claxton, Highsmith, Zaire Williams, and Ochai Agbaji. I'm sure the chat will love this one because several of these guys are popular names, particularly Highsmith, Zaire, and Ochai. Claxton is a popular name going back to last season and the season before. For the Lakers, I think the Lakers would probably want a more impactful 3-and-D wing. Like, I like Agbaji, I like Highsmith, I like Williams. I don't know if any of those guys are, again, like the standard I continue to reference is, I think the ideal player the Lakers trade for is a fifth guy who it's, game 4, game 5 of the Western Conference semifinals against Houston, against Denver, against OKC. Do you feel confident with that guy out there? Like that's the test for me of the standard I'm looking at for each of these guys. I do not feel confident with any of those guys out there as the fifth guy with the other 4. Could any of them pan out in that way? Sure. But I think if the Lakers are going to trade Rui and the first, which right now are probably their 2 best realistic trade assets, because I don't think they're seriously going to consider trading Austin, then I think they would want a higher return. So you are getting a high return from like a depth perspective. And I'm on board with, can you flip Gabe and Maxey for Highsmith and Agbaji? And like, that's a real rotation upgrade. And then you have a whole separate thing here of like Claxton versus Ayton, who's starting, how many minutes are they playing? Like, I don't think those are 2 guys who could play together. So you're either demoting Deandre Ayton or you're bringing in Claxton as a backup when, like, you could argue, at least off the last couple of years, Claxton has been the better player. I would say this year, Ayton's been the better player, but there's a little bit of like a tough situation where I think both guys can credibly point at the other one and be like, I'm the better player, I should start. Claxton's definitely the more versatile. Like, I think Claxton's better defensively. He's a more versatile defender, and he's been in that like all defense conversation over the last few years. Not in part, like not really because of the Nets defense and how bad the Nets have been, but in terms of like his individual performance, I think he's been there. But yeah, I mean, so that it's an interesting trade. I haven't even really looked at the other teams. I think first when I see these, I try to look at it from the Lakers perspective. I think the Lakers would probably want more of a Herb Jones, Andrew Wiggins, Dylan Brooks type in terms of like that type of starting level 3-and-D-ish type guy, and not necessarily a center when Ayton has largely exceeded expectations and been like a solid starter. So I'm not even sure that the Lakers do this. If we get into some of the other teams here, I think if I'm the Nets, I probably do this because I'm getting expiring money and I'm getting a first and I'm getting off some of this stuff. If you're the Raptors, to your point, you duck under the tax and you get some interesting young players. So I think the Raptors and Nets might do this. I think it might be the Lakers that actually say no. And I think they'd want, if we're like, I think the NBA sickos and basketball junkies are high on some of these guys, but I do think for the Lakers sometimes, like, there's like a name can carry some weight. And if the headline here is Claxton and you're giving up Rui in a first, I don't know that that's going to be enough for them. So I think the Lakers would actually probably want a better player here. Sagar, thank you for, I probably just butchered that, I'm sorry. Thank you for the super chat. Man, it's fun catching up with you at 1:30 p.m. here. Sorry, 13:30 you put. That's awesome. I am glad you're catching it at a reasonable time for you, and it's not super early or super late. So 1:30 late afternoon gang, it's a good gang to be a part of. Appreciate you. Mo Love, thank you for the super chat. Leave Luka in when he's on a heater. Yeah, I'm a proponent of, if a dude's on fire, just let them be. I assume you're talking about him closing the first quarter or not closing the first quarter. Let's see. He played all 12 minutes. Maybe you're talking about like starting the second with him. I mean, in general, I feel like Luka's minutes have been a little high even tonight. 38 minutes and 16 seconds is still a little bit too high for me. I think they got to find a way to get his minutes a little bit lower. But if you're talking about like the beginning of the second one, because he played the full first quarter, I forgot if he came out or not. He played the full first, but he did not start the second. I think at that point he'd kind of cooled off a little bit, so I guess I'm okay with it. But in general, if a guy's on a heater, I think you ride it out. Jay Drake, thank you for the super chat. Why is Gabe playing play Vando? Well, I think Gabe is playing, like we knew Gabe was going to play when he was named the fifth starter at the beginning of the season over Marcus and Jake. JJ clearly has an affinity for him. I think he is fine in the sense of he's not taking too much off the table offensively. Like he's not really making shots consistently, but I think he has reduced his usage since coming back, and I think accepted he's often going to be the fourth or fifth option in most lineups, and that is okay with him. I think the defense has ranged from solid to good. I still think there are some limitations. Like Utah, I kind of understood because they're quick, they're young, they're athletic, particularly the perimeter guys, and it's a lot of off. I think Utah and Golden State are a couple matchups where Gabe makes sense because he is someone who can switch quickly onto a guy coming off a screen, and like that's in Gabe's defensive wheelhouse. The Clippers, I'm not as sold on that. They have a lot, like, you know, James Harden is obviously big for a primary ball handler. Kawhi is big. Even some of the guys off the bench in like Sanders and Brown, they did have Gabe primarily matched up with Chris Paul, which was fine. But I think there are like, I don't love Gabe against OKC. I will say that. I think that's a matchup that can be problematic where I think like Kason Wallace is just straight up faster than him. And I don't think that's a matchup that Gabe is actually going to hold his own in. And then most of their rotation is notably bigger than Gabe. So I think it's a matchup by matchup thing. It doesn't seem to be the way that JJ views it. To your point about Vando, I've touched on Vando a million times, so I don't really want to get too into it. But the short of it is he's regressed as a finisher for the fourth straight season. The 3-point shot that was supposed to develop in training camp in the preseason has not developed. And I do think he's one of the more harmful players in the league, perimeter players in the league, in terms of how teams guard him. And unless you're playing him at small ball 5, which you could argue with Ayton out, maybe the Lakers should play him at small ball 5. If you're playing him next to another big or another non-shooter, like he should never play with Marcus Smart, and he should not play with Jackson or DeAndre. And the Venn diagram of minutes without Jackson, DeAndre, or Marcus Smart is very low. And it just gets tricky to fit, if non-existent at all. It just gets tricky to fit Vando in there. Light me up. Thank you for the super chat. Is it just me, or does it look like this team hasn't been lasering in on their defense until the second half, especially the fourth quarters? Yes, it's not just you. I thought again, like there was a stretch there in the second where the defense was pretty good, and part of like there were some moments in the third, but really it was the fourth that, like, the combination of Austin and LeBron going off plus the defense was what separated this game and sealed it. I do think the Lakers, again, if we want to nitpick a little bit, like there isn't a little bit of this team likes to play with its food, and I don't I think like, I don't want to say they don't respect the Clippers, because I do think they respect the Clippers to a degree. I mean, Luka doesn't respect the Clippers, but overall as a team, I think there is like a healthy level of respect for Ty Lue and Kawhi and James Harden, etc. But certainly against Utah, it was like there's an element of sometimes this team feels like, what is the least? It's like the smart kid in class who's okay with getting the B plus or the A minus instead of really like applying themselves and studying for 5 hours and getting the A plus. Like the Lakers kind of know, we could like study for 20, 30 minutes after school, then like chill the rest of the night. Then right before the test, kind of look at it again for 5 minutes and we'll be okay. We'll get at least a B plus, maybe an A minus, depending on how easy the test is. That's sometimes how it feels. And that's where, again, I continue to harp on like, OKC is the overachiever who is studying for 7 hours every night and, is on pace to go to Harvard or wherever. And, that's like the standard though. And that needs to be how I think LA is talented and skilled enough to like, clearly what they're doing is working. So I don't want to say it's not, and they need to make this like grand change, but I think in general, the reason why people will harp on like a net rating or a point differential as a true marker of how good a team is because if you play a lot of bad basketball or not to your peak and you're kind of just going through the motions and flipping the switch when you want to play well versus when you don't. And I thought the Charlotte game was a perfect game of that. I thought the Lakers tried for like a quarter, and in my opinion, a quarter and a half, if we're being really generous, but like somewhere between a quarter to a quarter and a half of that game. And it was enough to beat the Hornets by 10. But if they tried for 2.5 quarters or 3 quarters, I think they beat the Hornets by 20 or 25. And if they tried for the full game, I think they beat the Hornets probably by 30. And it's just like for them, I think they're okay again with that B plus A minus, when I would like to see a little bit more of a 48-minute killer instinct from this group of, let's get on them from the jump, which I think comes with changing the starting group. Then also let's build a big lead and maintain it, because they haven't built many big leads in general this season, or as many as they probably should have, but they also have struggled at times to maintain those leads. Tonight, they built on it progressively and continued to maintain it throughout the fourth, but which is why tonight was a big step in the right direction, in my opinion. But like I want to see more of that. So I totally agree with you. Not necessarily with tonight's game, but in general, yes, that the Lakers sometimes flip a switch a bit in the fourth. Utsu the Wee, thank you for the super chat. With Rui shooting so well in Lakers second in the West, his trade value is probably at an all-time high. With the heart emoji, or heart Rui, but I hope we take advantage and trade for a 3-and-D. Yeah, I mean, I think the complication here is that we're still a month out from trade season, so I think the Lakers are going to have to maintain this, and Rui's going to have to maintain his play into trade season. And it's not just about what you did the first month of the season. It's, can you continue that and continue to build off that? And again, I actually think you could argue moving Rui to the bench and maybe playing him a little bit less is a demotion, and maybe that changes his trade value. I would argue you could potentially slot Rui in certain lineups where he's a little bit high, like maybe instead of being the fifth option with the starters, he's more consistently like the third option in second unit groups. And it's like, Austin, LeBron, or LeBron, Austin, Rui. And then like Luka plus whichever big he's with, then Rui. And you just get a better balance, I think. Whereas if he's primarily playing with the starters or at least three of the other four guys, it's like there is a limitation to Rui's involvement in the offense. And I think right now we're kind of seeing that, where he has not quite been the same. I believe he's like just over 10 points per game now. I think he had 19 points going into tonight off the last two. So he's at 32 points through these 3 games, just over 10 points per game since LeBron returned. And it's not like, this isn't like a blame thing, that this isn't on Rui, this isn't on the big 3. This is just the hierarchy of the offense. Like Rui was obviously going to take a step back when LeBron came back, but I think it's maybe even been a little bit larger than we anticipated. And I think a better way to maximize him and to maximize the starting group is to insert a defender in there. But maybe, I mean, we'll see, right? But I think to your point, though, certainly most of the Lakers trade value pieces outside of probably Dalton and Vando are all trending in the right direction. Like certainly Maxey and Gabe are getting, I think, a little bit of a boost here. Those guys have looked more like rotation caliber guys compared to what we thought in the offseason. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. At what point does this fifth starter convo go from observation to agenda? Gabe did nothing and was plus 18. Small sample size, plus minus is pointless. Well, I'm not arguing for Gabe to start. If that, I'm not saying you're saying that, but if we're using Gabe as like, I get your point in terms of overall small sample size. Like again, the Lakers through the first two shifts with the starters were a minus. They have one little nice shift to close the game, and they end up being a positive. I think my bigger point, at least, again, this is one person's viewpoint, although I do think a lot of the audience and the fan base feels this way right now, at least based on what I've seen, is this was on my radar going back to when they originally got Marcus Smart and was already having the Marcus versus Rui conversation. It was a talking point throughout the entire offseason. We did not get to see it in training camp or the preseason or the start of the season because LeBron was out. But through the first 3 games that we've seen, and to your point, it is a small sample size, and you could flip the numbers however you want to flip them if you want to. My just point has been I've been underwhelmed by how the starting group has looked. I think they've been sliced and diced defensively, and twice by Utah, but then also by a Clippers team that was struggling. Is obviously been losing a lot. Just got Kawhi back, but not a good team, at least right now. So I just have a high again, if we're putting I'm putting the Lakers in title conversations here. I think they're not on OKC's level. I don't think they're on Denver's level. I think they're arguably on Houston's level. But if that's the standard, I don't think good enough or the B+ should be the goal. I think it should be you have an awesome starting lineup that can compete on both sides of the ball and is consistently winning. If your starting lineup is treading water or losing those minutes consistently, I just think, again, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot before the race starts, or you're starting the race further back than you have to, where everyone else is starting it at their, in their respective lanes at the proper spots, or OKC is starting the race halfway to the finish line. That's more so my point here is you could say look, they're 3-0 since LeBron came back. The bench is playing well and staggering. And once they start making subs, they start playing better. But my point is I do think those first 4 to 5 minutes or 6, whatever, 6 at most minutes still matter. And and part of this too is that we do have a sample size of the quartet of DeAndre Ayton, Rui, Luka, and Austin has been a minus all season. So this is not just a LeBron specific thing. This has been, and they've had different guys in that. Marcus has started, Gabe has started, Jake has started, but that quartet has just not worked up to this point in the season. And now we're 17 games in. Of course, DeAndre's missed a couple games. Luka's missed so it's not the best sample size, but up to this point, that quartet has not worked. The quick or early returns on the LeBron, I believe LeBron, Luka, and Austin are still a minus up to this point in the season as a trio, which is wild again, considering the caliber of opponent here. My point is, I think two things can be true. The Lakers, it might not ultimately matter because the Lakers might be so good that they can get away with not having a good starting group or losing those minutes. I just don't think that's the ideal way to start a game. The whole point of a starting lineup is to give yourself a chance to get out to a 10-2 start, get out to a 12-6 start, and give your bench an advantage when they come in, not continually being down or being tied, and then the bench comes in and has to save the game or swing the game. Like I just think that's a losing recipe long term. Might not matter against like 24 teams, but you look at the top 6 teams and how well those starting groups are playing. I think that like it's just to me like a small thing that could actually end up being a big thing if the Lakers aren't careful. Light me up. Thank you for the super chat. You can really see the difference in Luka's shape tonight. A huge offense tonight, and he had energy and effort on the defensive end. Thoughts? Yeah, I was thinking about that. And it's funny because even go back to last season, the whole notion of Luka being out of shape, and yes, we can look at the visual, right? Like clearly Luka is in better physical shape and just the body looks different, the transformation, all that stuff. And the defense has been notably better. So I think that's like the biggest area where we've seen the upgrade and the biggest difference between last season. But Luka was still having these nights of 35, 40, 45. He had so many big games for the Lakers. I mean, just tonight he tied, I believe, Magic for number 6 in all-time 40-point games for the Lakers. He hasn't even played a full season yet. He hasn't even played 3/4 of a season yet. I think technically he's a little bit around past the halfway mark, but hasn't even played a full season or 3/4 of a season as a Laker, and is already breaking all these franchise records. And to break Lakers franchise records is a big deal based on the history and all the legends who have passed through. So point being, like, I think Luka has this insane ability to carry usage and a workload offensively and do it every single night and deliver every single night. This dude rarely has an off night. Even if he's going to give you an inefficient night from like a shooting perspective, he's going to get to the free throw line. He's going to get you 8, 9, 10, 11 assists. He's just a monster and a very consistent monster at that. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I thought that the usage tonight, being able to play 38 minutes, take 28 shots, also 11 free throws, only have 3 turnovers with that type of usage, drop 43, hit as many step back jumpers as he hit, which is a sign of conditioning and legs. Like, definitely the offense has gone to a different level. I want to be clear too, because he was at like 28, 29 points consistently for the Lakers, or around 28 in the regular season. Then he was around 30 in the playoffs. But to elevate it to like 34, 35 as he's been to start this year, it's special. And then you couple in the fact that he's been better defensively, and I mean there's a real difference there. Efren, thank you for the super chat. Yo, still need a 3-and-D 2/3 and defensive center, but ceiling is rising. Offensively, this team is great to watch, but defensively still needs work. Do work, Buha. Thank you. I will continue to put in my 5 to 7 hours every single night of studying and trying to get A+ and whatnot. But appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, I think that the center, with what we're seeing from Maxey, I like, certainly they can upgrade the center spot. I don't know, but between Jackson and Maxey, I feel like the Lakers are fine at backup center. Could they do better? Yes. If you could get it, you do a trade for Nick Claxton and he's your backup, or you get a Daniel Gafford, or there are several other centers where, like this team, it would be great for the Lakers, like Steven Adams, right? Like if you had it, and that's not going to happen because of the team he's on and the situation he's in. But sure, if you added like a Steven Adams type off the bench, a big physical, bruising, dominant rebounder, hard, tough nose screen setter, like, yeah, that player would help the Lakers. But I don't know if it's like a necessity. I do agree that the 3-and-D 2-3 is a necessity for LA to get to the next level. But I think defensive center or a different type of center is like more of a luxury, more of a throw-in if you can. But certainly the first one I think is 100% something that they need to address. And what's funny is like the offense was great tonight, and it was great a couple nights or a couple games ago against Utah. But up to this point in the season, Lakers have actually been better defensively than offensively, which doesn't really pass my vibe test, but that's what the numbers say. And like, they're close in both, but I assume tonight the offensive rating will be taking a big jump. Easy peasy. Thank you for the super chat. If Lakers were to get the one starting three like Herb, etc., would JJ switching defense negate it, similar to how Vando's defense isn't utilized? It's a good question. Yes and no. Because, so I made this point because I think someone made the counterpoint, and it's a fair counterpoint, about Rui versus Marcus and how much the Lakers switch, that like, does that negate Marcus's impact or value as a potential starter? And my pushback to that was that, to a degree, yes, it's undeniable that if you are going to switch as frequently and sometimes as passively as the Lakers switch, there can be diminishing returns in terms of, like, you are allowing the defense to pick on, because I thought one thing that flew under the radar, and I didn't really touch on Rui's defensive game. Like, the Clippers were picking on Rui, which I found interesting. And there were several times where Rui was the help guy rotating out for the closeout, and like Chris Dunn attacked him off the dribble and scored on him. And there were times they were they were looking for Rui and calling him into the pick and roll. And I don't think you're going to see that with Marcus. But also, if you do take Rui off and you put Marcus on, they're going to shift it to targeting Austin and targeting Luka, right? And there was some targeting of Austin, there was some targeting of Luka, to be clear. But I was surprised that, like, it feels like teams try not or don't often target Rui. I mean, it depends who's out there, but I feel like made it a point to target Rui. However, I say all that to say, even if it does prevent maybe as many opportunities as Marcus can get on the ball as the primary point of attack guy or wing stopper, I think Marcus is a better help defender. I think he's a better defensive playmaker. So there are other benefits than just having that guy be the primary guy. Like, of course, the preference would probably be just to run a more traditional system and not switch as frequently, or at least fight over the screens or the situations to try to prevent switching. But then if you still just end up switching anyway, I think the benefit is, I would rather have Herb Jones as a help defender than Rui Hachimura. I would rather have Marcus Smart as a help defender than Rui Hachimura. So there are still overall benefits to the defense of Marcus is a guy that could slide over and take charges. Marcus is a guy who reads passing lanes well. He'll get deflections. He'll get steals. Or maybe he gets switched onto a big, but like Marcus actually fares pretty well when switched onto bigs. And that might be a thing where they try to exploit him in the post, and then he tips the inbounds pass or the entry pass, or creates a steal, transition opportunity, whatever. Same thing there with Herb Jones, where even in Herb's case, he's bigger than Marcus and certainly better and more versatile than Rui. So I think he kind of fits in more with that. So I would like to see in that case a shift in the defensive scheme. I'm not going to pretend that like that's going to happen or that I know that's going to happen. But even if it doesn't happen, I think just having better defenders out there will make the defense better. And there will be the times where Herb is able to snake around a screen, or maybe it's a Clipper situation where they have a Kawhi and a Harden, and it's like, okay, he's starting the possession on Harden, but then maybe he gets switched off onto like Chris Dunn, and then you do like a scram switch and he switches onto Kawhi. So like there are different ways to function defensively, even within a switching scheme, but I would just rather have the better defender out there and trust that is going, like, as simple as it sounds and as simple as it is, like having better defenders out there will lead to better defense. And right now, I think it's one thing if Rui was contributing more or featured more offensively, but with how concentrated it's been around Luka, Austin, and LeBron, and then also the center has a certain role as a rim runner and a roller, that spot is not as important offensively. But what is important with that spot is defense and rebounding. And Marcus is better defensively, Jake's better defensively, Gabe's better defensively. And I would say Marcus and Jake I actually think are better rebounders than Rui. So that's just where I think those guys complement the big four or the other four starters better, in my opinion. Bowen, thank you for the super chat. Great to see you. Says, great bumping into you at the press room bathroom. Yes, we had a run in the bathroom. For those who have seen my vlogs, it is a joint bathroom for not only all the media, but for a lot of the people in the VIP section. So Bowen is a big shot. He was in the VIP section and out in the patio where all the fun that we unfortunately don't get to see happens at games. And he was there in the press room bathroom, and he came to believe the first meetup, if I'm not mistaken, at Barney's Beanery in Santa Monica. So shout out to Bowen. Oots of the Weed, thank you for the super chat. I know you aren't very high on GV, but I'm bought in. Yes, he'd be a mismatch hunted, but he makes very few mistakes, and we usually don't lose his minutes. I'm not. So to be clear, I'm not high on Gabe. I think there's a couple levels here, right? So I did not think he should have been the fifth starter, and I think that Marcus and Jake are better and should play more. Like that's it. I'm not saying Gabe should be out of the rotation. Like some people want Gabe out of the rotation. Some people want him playing like 5 minutes a game. I'm not saying that at all. To me, he's more of like a 14 to 16 minute a night guy. And seeing Marcus has been the guy who's actually been the most affected by LeBron returning. You could technically say, I guess, Vando by just being kicked out of the rotation entirely, but among the projected top 9, with the assumption that the Lakers are playing a backup 5, Marcus has been the guy who's actually had his minutes slashed the most. Now, I don't know if part of that's a load management situation. I want to ask JJ about that. And, I need to ask JJ about that if no one else brings it up. But Marcus went from starting and averaging 28 minutes a game to coming off the bench, playing 17, 17, and 20 minutes these last 3 games. So, I thought there would be a reduction with LeBron back, and especially with him moving to the bench. That's also partly why I argue like the starting does matter, because Rui's consistently playing 30 plus minutes. Marcus is now 20 or less. Like I think that's too big of a gap between those guys, regardless of who's starting. But like so my point with Gabe is it's not an anti-Gabe thing. It's just I agree that Gabe is very solid, and Gabe does not make many mistakes, and the Lakers, like he's been a positive in the plus minus department if we're judging that by like the wins, the minutes or whatnot. The pushback would be Marcus Smart's second on the team in plus minus, and he leads the team in net rating. So if we are judging it purely by the metrics in terms of on off, Marcus, it's between Austin and Marcus for who's been the most impactful Laker this season on the floor versus off the floor. And so he's played more, he's played more than Gabe. So he does have a larger sample size and like more opportunities, I guess, to make that impact. And maybe with a larger sample size, once Gabe's played 15, 20 games, we'll have that sample size, and maybe Gabe goes up and Marcus goes down, and it's a different conversation. But up to this point, I think if we were ranking Marcus, Jake, and Gabe based on their performances this season, I think it would be Marcus, Jake, Gabe, and I don't really think there's an argument for any other order, in my opinion. So again, like that's subjective, that's not objective, but a lot of the lineup data support, like Jake's actually dealt with a lot of negative lineup data. And so, I guess you could argue with that, maybe Jake versus Gabe. I think Jake's been the more impactful player overall, but it's not, to be clear, it's not an anti-Gabe thing. It's more so, I think Gabe is playing or getting opportunities at the expense of better and more impactful players, if that makes sense. It's more like pro Marcus, pro Jake, but it's tough. It's a good problem to have, to be clear. Like the Lakers have a bit of a rotation crunch, and that's better than previous seasons. Alma, thank you for the super chat. Zdravo Jovan, what are your early thoughts on who would be the ideal first round matchup for the Lakers, assuming we make some kind of trade for the long-term defensive starter? Well, zdravo. Hope all is well. Let's see here. So right now, the Lakers are the 2 seed. They would be technically matched up with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That'd be a fun rematch. I mean, looking at the top, if we eliminate New Orleans, Dallas, Clippers, Kings, and Jazz, and probably Grizzlies, and we say the top 9 is the current top 9. I mean, I would say Phoenix or Portland are the 2 low-hanging fruit answers. Like, Phoenix is better than expected, and they have a hell of a defense, but it's still a relatively new group together. It's also, like, outside of Devin Booker, Dylan Brooks is shooting well, playing well. Grayson Allen is shooting well, playing well. I think there are ways to lock in, and like, it's a team where I think you could trap and double Devin Booker in like a playoff series context. And there might be a game or two, probably a game where their shooters go crazy and maybe you lose because of that. But for the most part, if Dylan Brooks and Grayson Allen are your number 2 and 3 options, I just don't think you're truly a viable playoff threat. So I would say Phoenix and Portland would be the 2 teams because I still think those are probably teams number 8 and 9. Otherwise, I guess Minnesota. I mean, it's between Minnesota and Golden State. I think that the difference, in my opinion, is that we haven't seen Golden State since opening night against the Lakers, but I mean, they're going through this whole Kuminga. Like, maybe it's Golden State. There's still something about the way that they play that I feel like, even going back to how LA struggled against Utah and JJ was comparing the 2 matchups, like, I think LA can really struggle against quick off-ball teams that push the pace, shoot a lot of threes, and just play with a certain verve in the half court. So I think Golden State's offense would just test their defense more than Minnesota's. And LA's already 2-0 against Minnesota this season. I think Minnesota is really lacking for ball handling and shot creation outside of Ant and Julius Randle. Jaden McDaniels has taken a step. So, like, their offense is very concentrated with those 3, to a lesser extent, like Dante when he's hot. But I don't know. I would say I would probably rake it Portland 1, Phoenix 2, Minnesota 3, Golden State 4. But if you want to argue for Golden State, as an easier matchup than Minnesota, it's hard to complain. Like, I'm assuming in this scenario that Golden State is at full strength. They're not having to rest guys on back-to-backs like full strength Golden State, I think, still scares me a little bit more than Minnesota. Jerry Soriano, your lender for life, 6062. Thank you for super chat. So refreshing. Luka loves crushing the Clippers. It's really something. I'd seen it before, but seeing it last year, then seeing it again tonight, it's like, I think it's the Clippers, it's the Suns, it's the Mavericks. He also has the beef with Chris Dunn that's gone, on for years now. It's it's fun, man. I like bad blood. I like beef. I like rivalries. That's fun. The Wannabe GMs podcast. Thank you for the super chat. Raptors, that's LA. Makes sense as partners, in my opinion. Not sure on exact deal. Ochai out of the rotation, conduct the tax. That's absorb money and have so many viable options. Thanks. So this is back to your 3-team trade earlier. I agree that I think there is something there. Again, I think just my understanding of LA's interest level in trading Rui and the first, I think it just has to be probably, again, like just a higher player than a Nick Claxton, and or at least like that player be a perimeter wing fifth starter type. So that's where I think there's a little bit of a breakdown on the LA side. But I thought your reasoning, I will note, like, a lot of times fake trades, in my opinion, are way too skewed or biased in favor of the team that you are a fan of, and it doesn't make sense for the other parties. Especially with a 3-team trade, it's really tricky to get everybody on board. I do think in general, your rationale with Toronto trading an out of rotation player, ducking the tax, although they are having maybe a tax worthy season, or at least start to the season. And then the Nets taking on some money, but also getting some picks and also taking on some expiring money to get off some money with like Claxton. And like, I thought that made sense. I think, again, it's just LA. I don't think LA is going to give up a first and Rui for like Claxton and Highsmith or Claxton and Agbaji. I think they'd want more. Keon Park, thank you for the super chat. The Kings, Pels, and other teams are willing to trade their 3-and-D players to the Lakers, but they don't want Rui, Gabe, Maxey, DK to match the numbers. Should LA hear what they want, like AR, Marcus, DA, Jake, or just let it go? Depends on the player. I mean, the other guy that I think we have to factor in here that I know fans aren't going to want to hear is Adu. I think if Adu looks really good in the like, now you can make the argument that Adu makes a lot more sense longer term with Luka and Austin and some of the other pieces, and I totally understand that, and I'm not advocating to trade him, but if it's really a situation where like they want to keep Rui, they want to extend him longer term, Gabe and Maxey just aren't moving the needle enough as expirings. Dalton has lost his trade value. Vando is not really tradable without attaching something. Does Adu become a throw-in or sweetener, or not even like throw-in or sweetener, but maybe even like a central piece to a potential deal that, you know, it's like, okay, take on our expiring plus Adu plus something else for this player. That's like if let's just say hypothetically, New Orleans, because the money works. If New Orleans is like, we'll take Gabe and a first, but for Herb, so the Lakers are keeping Rui, but we want to do Thero in there. I think you have to think long and hard about that, because in terms of the actual rotation, you are just swapping out Gabe and taking in Herb. You now start Herb, and your three primary bench guys are now Rui, Marcus, and Jake, and you're starting Herb Jones. Like that, I think just takes you to a totally different level. Like I think any trade where they could get the fifth starter and keep Rui is a huge win for LA. There are some guys I would consider giving up Rui for, but if you can get that guy and keep Rui, that I just think takes LA's depth to a different level. So I would throw Adu in here. I know, like I'm not looking at the chat right now, but I assume the chat doesn't want to hear that, and I get it. And I'm not advising that, to be clear. I'm just saying, with how he's looked and how young he is and the contract, like it might end up being a situation where he sneakily has like a lot, or not a lot, but like a decent amount of trade value, or he's just a sweetener that teams are like going to ask for and fight for. I think with, nothing has changed on the Austin front in terms of it's going to be a very high price for Austin. I don't think it's going to be a Herb Jones type. I don't think that's enough. I don't think it's a Keon Ellis type. I don't think that's enough or close to enough. Marcus, DA, Jake, I think it's a case-by-case basis. I guess if you're willing to trade Rui for a 3-and-D wing, you should be open to Marcus or Jake. Jake's just on such a great contract, making $6 million each of the next 2 years. Marcus is on, like, Marcus and DA are both on really good contracts as well. With DA, I just think it's like, if you're trading DA, now you're committing to either Jackson or Maxey as your starting five, or you're getting a big from one of these teams. But there's not a Kings big I would want as my starting five if I'm the Lakers. And there's not a Pels big I would want as my starting five if I'm the Lakers. So it's not Looney. Like Misi, I think, is a step down from Ayton, at least right now. With the Kings, it's not going to be Sabonis because of the money, but even if it was Sabonis, that's a major step down defensively. So I think you probably stay out of that second group. You add a dude to the first group, and you fight really hard to make it Gabe, Maxey, or Dalton. Is it Sancheet? I hope I didn't butcher that too hard. Hi, Jovan. Team needs better defenders. In parentheses, we ask lower turnovers and higher 3-point percentage. Doesn't mean we get the ring, but we will close the gap to the top for sure. I agree. I think adding a better defender or two into the rotation, lowering the turnover rate, I think that like that's going to come and go. being a team that can be heliocentric, and not just with Luka, but it can be heliocentric when Austin is leading a unit. We've seen that, but it could also, if you're going to go with like a LeBron led unit, like those guys are so great and dominant offensively that they're going to each have shifts or stretches where they are being ball dominant or heliocentric or whatever. That's naturally going to lead to some turnovers because there's going to be more trapping and blitzing and chaotic rotating from the defense, that you'll get the home run plays of the lob or the, like ping pass for a high percentage shot, but you'll also sometimes create turnovers with that. So like agree that there's definitely a line where it's one thing to have 14 turnovers, 16 turnovers, but the Lakers have had too many games like 19, 20, 21 turnovers. You don't want to be in that range, and that's relatively preventable. And then the 3-point percentage, I do think is going to regress to the mean as we saw tonight, but we'll see. But I agree, like if they clean those things up in terms of adding that defender or defenders, and then the offense is sharper and more polished, like that's where they're a true two-way force. Michael, thank you for the super chat. Just got here, but obligatory F Nico. At one point, Luka had like 42 points, rebounds, and assists in 20 minutes. Side note, if the Lakers were in the East, where would they finish? I like that. If the Lakers were in the East, I mean, I think they'd be top 2. I think they'd be pushing for the 1 seed. Yeah, I mean, I think they'd finish top 2. I mean, they might finish top 2 in the West, right? But I think they'd be right there as probably the favorite in the East. I think there are, like, right now, I mean, I said this a couple of streams ago. I think I tentatively have it where I think the 4 best teams in the NBA are in the West. And I think I'm going to start doing power rankings. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it on like shorts and like short form power rankings, or if I want to do a longer, like 5 to 10 minute video. But I think OKC, Denver, Houston, and the Lakers are my top 4 teams in the league. And no disrespect to Detroit, or no intended disrespect to Detroit, but I just think if you matched up any of those 4 teams against them in a series, I think they beat them. Madison says right now the Lakers are 5th in betting odds. BC says, nah, you could disrespect Detroit. It's cool. Brad says, need to see Lakers against Denver, Houston, OKC with the full team. Yeah, I mean, someone made this point, and I'm starting to like shift my thinking this way. I think it was on Thinking Basketball, where they were like, what if there's just like 7 or 8 good teams in the NBA, and basically every other team is bad, or, average to bad? And that's kind of where I'm at, where I think there's the top 4 in the West, and then you probably have like Detroit, Cleveland, and New York. Cleveland and New York when they're at full strength. I think those are the top 7 teams in the NBA. Maybe San Antonio could get there once Wemby's back and Castle's back and they get healthy and like have some time together. But it feels like those are the top 7 to 8 teams in the league. And everybody else is just kind of mediocre or bad. And that, like, those are the games I'm going to weigh very heavily, at least from the Lakers side, in terms of like how I view them. They've only played one of those teams, 2 if you want to throw in San Antonio. So they're either 0-1 or 1-1, depending on how you look at it. The OKC game was a disaster. I don't want to like harp on that too much, but I am very interested to see how they match up with Denver and Houston, how they look against Detroit, Cleveland, and New York, because it does feel like the top 7 to 8 teams right now are just rolling through the rest of the league. And it does feel like those matchups are really going to carry weight in terms of it's just a different caliber of opponent. Civic Citizen says, don't worry, Lakers will make them look good for 3 quarters. Well, if they do that, then they have the 4th quarter Lakers. You don't want to see the 4th quarter Lakers. Madison says, Jovan, what's your gut feeling on the playoffs? I say Denver. Is this like who wins the title? Or what do you mean by this? And for the record, in the comments, I do like Detroit. I just think, again, I don't want to make too much out of net rating or point differential, but OKC, Denver, and Houston are all in double digits in both, which is rare. Madison says, yeah, the title. So my title pick going into the year was Denver over New York. I feel worse about that right now for a couple reasons. One, the biggest reason I feel worse about that is because I think OKC is like just clearly the best team in the NBA. And I made this point before, I would not be surprised if they just have like a dominant 16-3 playoff run or something like that. The second reason is now Denver's dealing with a couple major injuries to Christian Brown and Aaron Gordon. And I think they're probably in danger of slipping at some point. And I would not be surprised if they end up in the 4-5 longer term. And if you're in the 4-5, you're going to play OKC in round 2. So I think if I'm Denver, if I'm the Lakers, if I'm Houston, I'm trying to avoid OKC as long as possible. And playing them in round 2, I think, is not ideal. Now, maybe they knock them out, but then you're going to go into like another slugfest with the Lakers or the Rockets in the conference finals. So, I guess you could argue maybe you want to face OKC earlier just to get it over with, but I would hope something happens, another J-Dub wrist injury or something where it's just that they're kind of compromised a little bit, because right now I am pretty afraid of OKC. I would currently amend my pick to probably OKC over Cleveland in the finals, but I don't feel good about Cleveland coming out of the East, and I think the NBA would the league office would have some issues if it was OKC Indiana and OKC Cleveland back-to-back years. Madison says, we all saw what Denver did to OKC last year, and they're injured with zero shooting. That's partly, that's why I picked Denver over OKC. And Denver's looked really good, to be clear. I just think the injuries scare me. Also, I'm big on lost time, lost opportunity. I think that's going to affect Denver a little bit. Although that group has obviously played together a ton over the last few years, with the exception of Brown. And then, I don't know, OKC is beatable, I think, but they are, and they've had one of the easier schedules in the league, which I think people aren't talking about enough. I just think that the thing is with OKC is this is actually this is one of the craziest things with OKC for me is, so first 5 games, they start 5-0. They have 4 of the 5 games are single-digit wins, including 2 double overtime games. They start the season with back-to-back double overtime games. Since then, since starting the season 5-0, they have won every single game by double figures, and they lost the one game to Portland at Portland, which is the second night of a back-to-back. But outside of that, they have won their last 12 games by double figures every game. So that's the thing is they don't have off nights, and Shea rests in the fourth quarter. They don't blow a lead. J-Dub's been out. Chet has missed time. They just steamroll everybody. It's insane. Bashir, dark horse trade target. I think someone we touched on earlier in Ochai Agbaji would be one. But I'll give you, I think one that I like, shout out whoever brought him up before, Justin Champagnie is an interesting one in, I think trying to pluck a 3-and-D type guy from a lottery team. Sadiq Bey, maybe. But I think a lot of the ones are the very obvious ones we've all touched on. Schmidt K, Jovan Smart, 24% from three. Rui, 48% from three. Luka needs space, don't you think? Yes, and this is part of the argument for this. I just think Luka, and not, I don't want to single out Luka here. I think more so the starting group. Like the point I made is if you look at the starting quartet of Deandre Ayton, LeBron, Rui, Austin, what do you need around those guys? You ideally need someone who can play off the ball as a cutter and shooter. You need someone who can defend, ideally 1 through 4, but at least 1 through 3. And then you do actually have, like, for each of their positions, Ayton as a center, LeBron as a 4, Luka as like a 3-4, and Austin as a 2. They actually are all good rebounders for their respect. You can actually argue Ayton's like the worst rebounder of the group for his position, which is saying something because Ayton is a good rebounder. But I still think, like, in general, you want like a motor guy, with some rebounding. That's the clear, like, third skill within that. But like a dirty work guy, right? Because if we're being like, Luka, LeBron, Austin, and Ayton are not dirty work players first and foremost. Like, I think each of those guys has embraced that a little bit more in their Lakers tenure. Austin's weaned off from it, but I think is like reincorporated it into his game. It's kind of just who he is. But those guys aren't like dive on the ground for loose ball type guys or take a bunch of charges. Like, Austin takes charges, but point being, like, I think you need that like gritty energy hustle guy to a degree with those guys. Marcus checks 2 of those 3 boxes: the defense and that energy, hustle, tenacity type player. The shooting has obviously been an issue, and it is potentially an issue that just prevents him from starting or playing too much. But the flip side, I would say, is like Rui checks the offensive box, clearly with the cutting, the transition, the shooting. He just does not check the defense box, and he does not check the energy. To me, Rui is more. He can bring it, right? He brought it the first thing I think about with Rui bringing energy, game 5 against Minnesota, dunks on Gobert with the left-handed dunk that like galvanized the group a bit. But for the most part, I feel like Rui is more of a go with the flow energy guy. And it's like, if the team's really amped up, then Rui's more amped up. If the team's a little bit lower, Rui's a little bit lower. Marcus is an energy generator, and Marcus comes in and just gives you a spark regardless of whether the team is giving you that spark or not. So I do think, through the lens of simply shooting, yes, of course, Rui's a better shooter and Marcus's shooting has been problematic. I think there are more boxes for the 5th starter to check, and I think Marcus checks basically all of them, and Rui checks almost none of them. So that's where the gap is there for me. A really good point here from Sammy. He says, people talk about Denver improving, but OKC has improved even more. I agree with this. I feel like people, again, I don't want to generalize, but people, at least a lot of the discourse I see is like OKC is the same team as last year. And it's like, no, they're actually much better than last year. And they haven't even been full yet. It's like here's the thing. The Lakers were better than last year without LeBron based on record, but they were not better really in terms of like net rating or like, LeBron had obviously his on-off stuff, but like it would be the equivalent of like the Lakers having the same record they had, but being like a +7, +8, +9 instead of like the +2, +3 that they've been most of the season. OKC went from already being +12, which was a historic mark, to now being in that +15, +16 conversation, which is just, it's historic. I don't know how else to put that. Connor Phillips asked how many quarters OKC has lost this season. I don't know, but it's not many. Or at least not like quarters of consequence. Red Cloud, who do you think will win the Eastern Conference? My preseason pick was New York. I'm feeling worse about that. I would probably give Cleveland a slight edge, but I think it's a really close competition between Cleveland, New York, and Detroit. With Detroit, it's sort of an experience thing where it is hard to make the jump from like first round and out to finals team. You typically go through a progression of like second round or maybe conference finals. I think a real win for Detroit would be beating New York or Cleveland in round 2 and then like losing in the conference finals. Like, I think that's a really successful season for them. So I still think Cleveland and New York, based on the top end talent with both teams, you got Mitchell and Mobley, and then Brunson and Cat, the experience with both teams. Mitchell's been to the conference finals before. Cleveland has not gotten over the hump yet. So like that's their focus. With Cleveland, it's not about, they've already shown they can win 60 games. Doesn't matter. You got to do it in the playoffs. That's like their whole season is getting to the playoffs whole and getting to the playoffs and getting over the hump. With New York, they just got to the conference finals, and I think that they're trying to build off of that. There's no more Boston. There's no more Indiana. Like New York this might be New York's best chance to get out of the East for a while, because Boston is going to get Tatum back. Indiana is going to get Halliburton back. And, I think Milwaukee could potentially make a move to become more competitive longer term. Philly's got a bunch of young, interesting guys. I think Orlando will progressively get better. Atlanta's really interesting. So like this might be the most wide open the East is for New York and Cleveland. Cleveland longer term, I think Mobley's going to continue to level up. So I don't know, that one might be a little bit more wide open for them longer term, but New York, I think is in a really like critical spot to, this would be the year to make the finals. So I would give Cleveland the slight edge in my opinion, but it's close between Cleveland and New York. And I don't think we can rule out Detroit yet. BC says Luka's averaging almost as many rebounds as Ayton. Yeah, I mean, I think Luka's the best rebounder on the team, just straight up. Kane Carter saying Rui needs to go because he's not a starter on this team defensively and checks out. If he comes off the bench, what's the point in having an $18 million expiring who can't start or finish? I mean, the other thing, like JJ went to him to close, but he didn't play as many minutes the first Utah game in the fourth, though part of that was the Lakers blew them out and then like rested their guys. But even within that, he didn't play as many minutes as some of the other starters, and then didn't play in the fourth quarter. Or no. One of the two Utah games he didn't play in the fourth. One of the two Utah games he played only 6 minutes. So 6 of a potential 24 minutes Rui played in the 2 fourth quarters, prior to this game. Ends up playing, I think he played a decent amount in this fourth, right? Played 5.5 minutes. So, which was the fewest of the starters. So I don't know. Like, yeah, Rui's, I don't think Rui has to go. I think it's all within the context of like who are you getting and what's the price and whatnot. But yeah. Madison says Rui's also showed up in the postseason. Unless you get Dylan Brooks type player, Rui's starting. I mean, like Marcus Smart has a lot of postseason experience, so not as a Laker, but this is a dude who's been to a couple of conference finals. I mean, looking at forgot a couple. He's been to 5 conference finals and 1 NBA finals in 2022. So, and Mark, I mean, and look at the 32 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 38 minutes, 36 minutes, 36 minutes, 34 minutes. He hasn't done it in a couple of years, but Marcus has been, and for the last 4 playoff trips, he was full-time starter the whole time. So now you could argue like Rui has the continuity advantage, but Rochelle, it's Rich. Sorry. I was reading the full name there. What up, Rich? Should Ty Lue go or their GM? Tough to say. I don't think it's a coaching issue. I think Ty Lue's still a special coach. So I would say if someone has to go, I would put it more on the front office and this roster that they constructed that's very old and injury prone. So I would put it more so on Lawrence Frank. I don't think either is going to go, to be clear, but I mean, maybe the aspiration thing blows up in their face and that's a different story, but Madison says if you believe LeBron could be the shooter he was in 2024, you could talk yourself into starting Smart. That's fair. All right, catching up on the chat. Going to go 5 more minutes, and it's a hard 5 minutes because it is pretty late, and I do have to get up to do Lakers Collective tomorrow. Madison 608. This is the Rui argument. JJ loves threes. You need to play by far your best shooter. Again, like I'm not advocating for Rui to not play. I think the argument here is to play Marcus more, which I think he's playing a little bit too. I think that the drop from 28 to 17 minutes is too big of a drop in my opinion. But 2, it's more so how you start the games, and I think And look, maybe you start Marcus and it just doesn't work, and then you pivot back to Rui or you test Jake or something like that. But I just think the Lakers, we have enough of a sample size. Overall, the first quarter has been their worst quarter this season. Most of the starting groups they've tried have not played well. The combination of Ayton and Rui together in particular has been a negative, especially on the defensive end. We've now seen this group for 3 games. It's been exactly as we've thought. We're like, it's a work in progress offensively, and there was obviously a lot of really good stretches during the game. But like I'm talking specifically with the starters, like they're still figuring out their flow, their rhythm, all that stuff. But the defense has just not been good. And they entered tonight with a 130 defensive rating with the starting group. I would assume, or at least that quartet of Rui, Luka, LeBron, Austin, I would assume that did not improve off of tonight's game. Zoopcut says Reeves is a very underrated defensive player, best defender in the starting group. I agree with that. I think that's going to be blasphemous for some people, but I agree with that. I have actually never viewed Austin as a negative. I viewed Austin more as a neutral defender who is a positive in certain matchups and can, of course, he's a 6'5", 200-pound guard. So yes, Julius Randle is going to bulldoze through Austin's chest and score on him. But there's a lot of shooting guards who Julius Randle would bulldoze in big boy. I also think, stuff with Austin that gets underrated is he takes charges, he rotates well, he's always in the right spots defensively. So yes, there are times he'll get blown by off the dribble, or there are times he'll get posted up, or someone will drive through his chest. But I think he's largely in the right spots. Doggy saying, so what if Rui's defense is bad? Luka and Reeves' defense is also negative. Yeah, but Luka and Reeves are much better players overall, but specifically much better offensive players. So if you just you can't hold your role players to the same standards as your stars. You do have to a degree, of course, in terms of you don't want your stars just mailing it in and not trying. But the whole point of having role players and supporting cast guys and glue guys is to do the dirty work and to defend. There are not many stars who are all defense level stars or clear positive defenders and also carrying a certain load offensively. That's what makes a guy like a Giannis, or to a lesser extent a Shea, rare, or a Tatum when he's healthy. But but even then, those guys aren't carrying. Giannis is an exception. Shea and Tatum don't have the same offensive load that Luka has. So it's just I don't think you could just say if anything, I actually think your second point proves why Rui's defense is a problem, because if you're saying Luka and Austin are negatives defensively, which I don't fully agree with, but I'll say that, then you need another player out there to defend. And if Rui's not defending, then that kind of defeats the purpose of that fit starter, in my opinion. Luka says, hey, Jovan, what trade do you think could get the Lakers to the next tier, and what's up with Jake? I'm not sure what you mean by what's up with Jake in terms of like the consistency or what with Jake. And then in terms of trade, I think it's, I think in terms of like potentially available guys, it would be something like, I think Herb Jones is like the dream target right now. I would say to a lesser extent Wiggins and Brooks, but Wiggins and Brooks might not be available. Phoenix is 6th in the West. Miami's 3rd in the East. Like, why would they trade those guys? Thomas says underrated trade targets from Atlanta, Charlotte, and San Antonio. I don't think San Antonio is going to sell off. I think San Antonio is going to remain a top 6 team in the West. I mean, if you really want to get San Antonio, I feel like Vassell could be a guy who like doesn't like Vassell. Like there's an overlap to a degree with Harper and Castle and Fox, but I think there's also an overlap with Vassell, and he projects to be the worst of those 4. Or might even be the worst of those 4 just right now. I mean, I already think Fox, of course, is better, but I think Castle is better too. Harper versus Vassell is probably relatively close, but Harper's the number 2 pick longer term. You'd rather have him. So I could see maybe Vassell being a guy who makes some sense to flip. And could you get, I still think they could use another like big wing or big forward that fits well next to Wemby and maybe is better than Harrison Barnes. So could you flip Vassell for that type of guy? Atlanta. Mo Gay is a guy I really like, and not just because of the game he had against the Lakers. I don't know. This one's a little tricky. Do they try to get off Porzingis at some point? And then Charlotte, I think the obvious one, there's a couple like Miles Bridges, but I've talked about why that's a little complicated. Josh Green. Those are probably the two guys there. To be clear, just to go back to something quickly, I don't think Austin is the best defender in the starting group. I think the part I was more agreeing with was that I think he's an underrated defender, and I don't think he's as bad as most people think he is, or a lot of the chat at least. Omaris asks, which side are you on, the Kmart or Draymond beef? I am firmly on the Draymond side. I like Kenyon Martin. He was actually one of my favorite players in the early to mid 2000s, but this dude had Popeye Jones and Reggie Evans out there over, like, I think it's quite frankly, like just a misunderstanding of like, I think Draymond, in my opinion, is one of the 5 best defenders of post 2000. Maybe you could put him like top 7 or 8 if you really want to nitpick and put him lower, but there's no like David Lee. Sure, David Lee averaged 20 points a game. He was an all-star once. Draymond took David Lee's job, and you saw what happened when they went from David Lee starting to Draymond starting. They went to a totally different level. Like I don't even know if I fully agree with like defense is half of the game. I think it might be 55-45 in favor of offense, but even through that lens, like Draymond is most of that list does not have like a single skill that comes close to how good Draymond is defensively. So that's where like I think like Draymond versus like Chris Webber is a very interesting thing, right? Because people think of Chris Webber and they think of leading Sacramento, and like, it depends on how you want to like define who's better, like who's going to put up better numbers. Chris Webber, and maybe he's overall more impactful, but Draymond is going to lead a defense, and like basically for the last half decade has been a full-time center leading that defense, and they're consistently a top 10 defense, and it's not like they're loaded with defensive talent. So I don't know. Madison says Jovan Rui at least has the physicality to improve defense. There's upside. I feel like we've been saying that for 3 years and it hasn't happened. So I I don't know. Like, I agree with you in theory and in principle. I just think in practicality, we have not really seen that happen. Like, we've seen him improve, but I feel like I think he's been worse than last year defensively. And I just think there's like a ceiling where, like, at best he's average-ish, but I think more nights than not, he's below. Xavier, Jovan, how would playing and potentially losing to OKC in the in-season tournament affect this team? I mean, it would be tough, right? I think I do think there is a mental component, and what proved this mental component to me a little bit was that there were guys who privately admitted that, like, Denver got in their head. This is like going back to the 2023-24 season, that, like, you know, and I'm not going to name names. But there were guys in the locker room who were just straight up like, Denver has our number. Like, Denver is better than us. And I do think that a team, like, convincingly beating a team or beating them a bunch of times does, and, like, publicly, no one's going to say that, you know, whatever. Or actually, I think a couple guys did kind of say it publicly, but it's like, you know, everyone's going to have put on a certain facade or confidence publicly, but these guys are, despite a lot of NBA players being, like, delusionally confident in a positive way, and that's what, like, helped them make the NBA, there's a human nature element of a team. If they lose to OKC by 20 again, like, that is a bit of a, you know, you mark that away. But I think the best case scenario in a loss would just be like a more competitive game that actually comes down to the wire. Of course, the best thing would be, like, actually beating them, but I think it depends on the nature of the loss. Is it like a close game where they're clearly like much closer to beating them or on par with them than last game? Or if it's like a wire to wire route, then that's pretty demoralizing, in that I feel like could affect a little bit of the confidence. Like, I don't want to say they will lose their confidence or think they can't beat OKC, but, you know, if you've lost 2 games to them by like 50 points combined, like, that's obviously not a great sign of, like, where that matchup's at. But they have plenty of time to improve the team, improve as a team. So I don't want to overreact to that. Marvin asks, Jovan, are you from LA? Yes, I am. Chris, y'all shamed him out of that. No, I'm standing on business with my Austin take. I don't think he's like, I mean, I've gotten flack for saying LeBron. I talk about LeBron's defense and people don't like LeBron's defense. I think overall among the group for the start of the season, I would say DeAndre Ayton's actually been the best defender of the group. I think LeBron was better tonight defensively than he had been in the 2 previous games. He's still getting blown by a bit, but he did have some nice contests and you know, he had a block and I thought had some nice rim protection. Luka's had some good moments and overall been better defensively than last year. I think Austin has ranged from like average-ish to solid. And then I think Rui has regressed a little, but like still in certain matchups can be solid. All right, I'm going to wrap here because we are at the 2-hour mark and I have to get up in less than 8 hours. So I am going to call it here, but I'll be back tomorrow for a new episode of Lakers Collective with Trevor Lane and Jason Timpf. We're going live at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So make sure you tune in for that. Then, as I mentioned earlier in the week, I am going to be not as active this week. I have my son out here, so I'm going to prioritize family time and spending the rest of the week with him and Thanksgiving. So we'll be going live after the games Friday and Sunday, but we'll not be doing any other shows or episodes throughout the course of the week, barring like something crazy happening, like a trade or an injury or you know, something wild. Barring that, I will only be going live after the games Friday and Sunday. But I appreciate you all and want to shout you all out. almost 900 of you in here right now. Thank you so much for the past year. Thank you so much for the past year and a half with this show, with this channel, growing this out. Shout out to the Late Night Gang. I appreciate you. I thank you. I know you can spend your time doing a bunch of other things, but rocking with me at 2 a.m. Pacific time, and whatever time it is, wherever you are right now, it means the world to me. So I appreciate you guys, and I will talk to you all very soon. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow on Lakers Collective, Friday on here. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Hope you all get some great food and family time. I will see you all soon.